peaceful U.S. streets, masked agents kidnapping folks without warrants or cause, U.S. House districts openly stolen in Texas, sex traffickers protected in high places, a weaponized DOJ, and Snoop Dogg doesn't like cartoon lesbian relationships. Welcome to The Oath and the Office. I'm John Fugelsang. This week on the pod, Trump has signed an executive order banning flag burning. Despite decades of Supreme Court precedents protecting flag burning, Trump has attempted to fire the Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. In California, Newsom and the Democrats are considering dismantling an independent redistricting commission in response to the aggressive Republican gerrymanders elsewhere. And in a striking remark, comb over Caligula suggested that a lot of people might like a dictator. To help us unpack the unconstitutional, political, and civic stakes in all of this, please welcome Professor Corey Brettschneider, one of the nation's foremost constitutional law scholars and the author of The Oath and the Office. Professor, welcome back.
Thanks so much, John. I mean, what a week. We'll cover a lot, as you said, the flag burning executive order, essentially trying to revoke free speech, although he did it in a bizarre way. We'll talk about that. It has all sorts of complications. The fight about gerrymandering, all of these things, it lead us to a moment where we're going to feel confused, but I think one of the best defenses of democracy is just to clarify what's at stake, to think clearly about it, to have some humor, and that's what this podcast is all about. So, what a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Well, I'm glad you think it's a pleasure because the Constitution is once again being tested on multiple fronts. Let's begin with the silliest, which could be the scariest. And that is that Trump signed an executive order he thinks bans something that's still legal and is still protected by the Constitution. His logic was incredible. He said burning a flag incites riots. So does he, but we can't ban him for some reason. And now, Corey, if you torch a flag in protest, you get a year in jail. But if you beat a cop half to death with an American flag while storming the Capitol to keep Daddy Trump in office, you get a pardon and a high five on Truth Social. Obviously, frothing right-wing guys love this, but a lot of conservatives actually get why they're being manipulated. The guys with the bald eagle tattoos on their beer bellies, they're chugging Daddy Trump's hard Kool-Aid like it's communion wine. But Corey, didn't Antonin Scalia, the right's fossilized legal pope, confirm this was free speech? I mean, when Scalia's to your left on civil liberties, maybe take the loss, but hasn't the court been clear since Texas v. Johnson in 1989 that flag burning is protected speech?
Wow, I love how you set this up because it is both the silliest and the scariest, and that's what makes it so weird and hard to discuss. And, it's complicated too by the fact that they got some lawyers involved in this and so tried at least to do it in a way that was constitutional. But I'll just start with the basics and then we can get into it. The basics are that absolutely that in Texas versus Johnson, the Supreme Court of the United States very clearly decided the question of whether or not burning an American flag is protected speech. The First Amendment guarantees the freedom of speech. So there was a question. Well, burning a flag is not talking, it's not writing, but is it expression? And does speech mean expression? And even originalists, defenders of the idea that only the text of the Constitution lays out the law, including Justice Scalia, agreed that yes, that burning a flag is a kind of expression that is core political speech. It's about opinions, or as the court talks about it, viewpoints, and it's protected full stop. You can't criminalize it. So what's going on here? Well, they don't like burning the American flag. This president wants to be a dictator, and I think that's the simplest explanation, that as was the case with the revocation of birthright citizenship, he's just saying, I don't care what the court said. I'm going to do this. Now, the lawyers got involved. So I read the executive order, and they did try to pitch it in a way to make it sound more reasonable. So I'll tell you what they said. And, in this weird press conference, one of his staffers tried to make this clear as well. What the executive order says is that sometimes burning a flag is incitement to violence. And the court's been very clear that if you incite a riot under a case called Brandenburg, that incitement to violence is not protected speech. It's an exception to the First Amendment. So if you burn a flag, say, in front of 1 million people who have guns on them, and then they go and spark a riot, that sparks a riot, that's not protected speech. By the way, his speech at the Ellipse, which sparked an attack on the Capitol, is a very good example of speech that is incitement.
Exactly.
So now here's what let me just, say this one last thing, because it's an issue that is both enraging but also complicated. So I want to try to get it right. The what the executive order does is it defines flag burning as incitement. So if you had a case like I described where you burned a flag and a riot happened, then I get it. That's not protected speech. Here's the problem. That's not what he thinks he did. He thinks he came up with a way around the court or doesn't care what the court said, which is to say all flag burning is incitement. That's what I think he thinks. And so it doesn't matter what the executive order says. It doesn't matter what the staffer says. It matters what he communicates to Pam Bondi. And my worry is he's going to communicate, hey, go and arrest a bunch of flag burners. And that is a violation of what the court said. Now, one last twist. What if the court upholds it? As crazy as that is, we have a precedent, Texas versus Johnson, but they've been known to create exceptions or to accommodate him. And so I'm through promising that the Supreme Court's going to strike something down.
I mean, I'm sure they will, but let me just ask, if such an order, Professor, were actually enforced, what would be some of the immediate constitutional challenges? I mean, and the dangers it would pose to other forms of dissent or symbolic protest. Not that that's going to happen. This is something much more sleazy and insidious, but
Yeah.
if it did.
I mean, I'm really unsure what they're going to do with this. I could see actually a possibility that Pam Bondi is told by Trump, go out and arrest some flag burners. And there are already some reports that I'm reading about arrests happening. One
Well, that's the point.
and so now the second you do that, these flag there are very almost no instances that I can think of burning flags that spark riots that meet this standard of incitement. So it's clearly, regardless of what the executive order said, it's an illegal arrest. It's an illegal use of the executive order. And the short answer is certainly the lower courts would say this case has already been decided and throw the case out. The only way it survives is if there's an appeal to the Supreme Court and it, say through the shadow docket where it doesn't give reasons, upholds it. Now, I do think that's unlikely to happen,
Yeah,
but
me too.
I mean, it could be they don't take the case. But the bottom line is the president of the United States. I don't want to lose the headline. The president of the United States is trying to revoke the right of free speech, full stop, and that fits
Yeah.
into his attempted hard coup that we're seeing with the militarization of Washington, D.C., and his promise to move into Chicago and New York next.
It's so exciting for me when you and I disagree on things.
Ah,
And here's an example, Professor. And let me tell you why. I get everything you're saying, but I think this is something much more mediocre. Trump's White House staff secretary, Will Scharf, was there. Like the adult who gives him the thing to sign. I love the signing ceremonies because he's like a toddler signing the Mother's Day card for mom that he has not read and did not buy himself and has no idea what's in there, but he's doing what he's supposed to do because this makes him good. And Will Sharp is the guy who stands there and explains what you just signed, sir, for the cameras. It's so humiliating. And he said yesterday, he clarified, I'm going to quote him, this order doesn't really do anything Trump's claiming. He said, what the executive order does, sir, it charges your DOJ with investigating instances of flag burning. And then, where there is evidence of criminal activity, where prosecution wouldn't fall afoul of the First Amendment, it instructs the DOJ to prosecute those. Now, Corey, this is fascinating to me. So you can still be prosecuted for burning anything in a place where you're not allowed to set fires. If you burn somebody else's flag or damage somebody else's property, you can still be prosecuted. The government still can't prosecute protected expressive activity. It's still legal to burn your own flag, just like now. So, what really changed? It's not really about flag burning. I think this is more about sending a political signal, and it's more about getting flag burners on camera. I think Donald Trump did this so left wing guys and the anti Trump majority would burn flags to protest him. I think that's what he wants. And that's the point of it. He wants to inspire more, not less flag burning, because he needs those images on Fox and News Nation and Newsmax and
yeah.
OAN to reunite the shaky base behind him, because those evil leftists are trying to burn our flag and only I can protect you. Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't think we're going to see much in the way of legality about this at all. Do you, Professor?
I'm not so sure. I wish look, I hope that you're right. That would be great if it was just a sort of ruse and a kind of, political posturing. But more and more, my analysis of Trump is that the things that look outrageous are test balloons that then turn out to be potentially, because of the power of the presidency, extremely dangerous. So on the one hand, it looks silly. I agree with that part. And I agree actually with all your political analysis of why he's doing it. So, you've done a lot more improv than I have. I wish I did improv in college. I wish I took acting, but I do know the main rule of improv is yes and. So I'll say that here, that I agree with all of that, except I'm going to add something more frightening. And it has to do with the nature of executive orders. And executive orders are not laws. And I think that's extremely important. Laws are statutes passed by Congress or by state legislatures, signed by the governor in the case of state statutes, or the president in the case of federal statutes. And judges can look to them and say, hey, this is what's binding. These
Right.
words, bind us. Executive orders are different. They really are the will of the president, the thing that the president wants done. So I love the deep reading that you've done of that press conference, and it reflects too. I went and read the executive order. What's in it? It's very carefully drawn, and it says essentially, no, you can't arrest somebody for burning a flag unless they cause a riot, and that's not going to ever happen, really. So, what does it really do? It looks like it does nothing on paper, but now here's the problem. An executive order isn't what's on paper. It isn't certainly what the staffer says, who could be fired tomorrow by Trump if he gets annoyed with him. It's what
Right.
Trump wants. And what Trump wants, and I have no doubt about this, is to see is for people to burn the flag, to see the arrest of those people, and to use it as an excuse for more
Exactly.
militarization. And so that's
Exactly.
what I worry is going to happen. That, yeah, the lawyers are telling him, and this happened all the time during Trump 1, you can't do that. And so if you listen carefully to what he said, actually, this was my favorite part of the press conference. He said, I've come up with a solution, and I told them to put it in there. It's that if you burn a flag, it's always going to cause a riot. That's his idea in his convoluted head. Of course, that's not true. So what they put in there is this idea, if it causes a riot, if it incites violence. But that's not what he thinks it does. And
Right.
yet,
Right.
here's the scary thing about our system, why we have a whole podcast called The Oath in the Office. Executive orders are not laws. They are the power of the president's brain, this deluded psychopath brain. And this psychopath brain wants to see flag burners prosecuted. And you know what? He might get it.
Corey, before we move on, can I ask you a question that's kind of been keeping me up at night?
Please.
I'm
And,
scared
and tell
about
me too
this.
if any of that's unclear, because I
No,
think it
no,
goes to the heart of
it's
how dangerous our system is.
no, you nail it. But I got a cousin. He's a huge Trump guy, huge, and he has American flags tattooed all over his body. It's his passion. Having his body inked in the red, white, and blue. And sadly, now my cousin is dying because
Yeah.
Trump took away his health care and his union was broken up, and he had to sell the farm because of the tariffs, and the rural local hospital shut down before the measles epidemic hit his town. But he's still loyal to Trump, and he's dying,
Wow.
and his body's covered in flag tattoos. Corey, here's my
Is this
concern. If
hypothetical or real?
if we cremate my cousin, who's covered in flag ink, do I have to serve a year in prison for flag burning? Or do I have to laser off the tattoos from his corpse first, fold them into a neat triangle, and present them to Mar-a-Lago with a thank you note? What is the proper thing to do? It's flag burning, right? How do I dispose of his body? What do I do?
I thought in the beginning this was a real example, but I'm taking it it's not. Is that
Yes,
correct?
you should not expect that from me,
Okay, I was
Professor.
getting.
I'm here to make you question a lot of the choices you've made professionally in your life. I just love it. It's so
Can I give
ridiculous,
an
but this
honest
is
answer to it, though? The
yes,
honest
it's not
answer.
supposed to be. This is the absurdity we're faced with. Please give me an honest answer.
I mean, this is what's so frightening about our system, and it's going to sound like an exaggeration. But if you were talking about what the law allows, that's one thing. When we're talking about who to prosecute, that really is, at least at the federal level, it's up to one person, and that's Pam Bondi. Now, if Pam Bondi was a decent person, if somebody who respected the traditions of the Department of Justice, created to prosecute the Klan and civil rights offenders, and since the 1970s, after Nixon, with a norm of isolation from presidents telling her what to do, I would say no, of course not. That's you can't do it because it's not constitutional. It's not consistent with the executive order. We could come up with all sorts of explanations, but the sad fact to the question of can that person be prosecuted is always going to be it's up to this president. Now, can they succeed in that prosecution? Will it survive the courts? Probably not. And in fact, a lot of the arrests in Washington, D.C., thankfully, this is some of the hope, is the courts are saying, what the hell are you doing? Like the guy with the sandwich, for instance, that's going nowhere, who threw the sandwich at the, the occupiers, let's call them, on the street. But
The
who they
sandwich.
can try to prosecute, that's up to this crazy president. That's what's so enraging about this flag burning, both silly but dangerous at the same time.
Absolutely. Let me shift gears a bit because as we mentioned at the top of the show, Trump is trying to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. And in doing so, he's trying to set fire to the very idea of central bank independence. Corey, we've discussed this already with Powell a couple of weeks ago. The president does not have the authority to do this. The Federal Reserve was designed to be insulated from the whims of politicians precisely so a guy like Trump couldn't treat interest rates like his own voluntary surge pricing. And why did he target Ms. Cook? Officially, a complete rubbish reason that is neck deep in hypocrisy for a convicted felon. His justification was a laughable smear about mortgage fraud, which was accused of 4 years ago, never proven, no evidence, just a claim. And so this guy, a 34-time convicted felon who's convicted of insurance fraud. I mean, he's got a long history of singling out women of color in power, and this is the first black woman to ever serve as a Fed governor. Racism with this guy is always cloaked with cause. Corey, this has been framed as part of the unitary executive theory, and we've learned so much about it from you. But for those who are just tuning in for the first time, can you briefly explain what that doctrine is, why it applies here, and why it's so dangerous?
Well, at the founding of the United States, I'm getting so interested in those who warned against ratifying it. And you'll see how this leads to the unitary theory. They're called the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists, Hamilton, who's got the musical after him, Madison, they defended ratification. They said this was a great document. And then there were these other people, often forgotten, who are like, do not do this. And one of the chief reasons they gave was that there was a lot of leeway in the system to allow a president to become a monarch. And they worried in particular of the hiring and firing power, that it would become absolute. A lot of the framers thought it wasn't absolute. You could create laws that limit it. So
Right.
now let's move to this example. The Federal Reserve is created by a law that says the president doesn't have total control. It's too important, the control over interest rates and the mandate of the Federal Reserve, which is both to combat inflation and unemployment, to figure out how to balance that out with the various policies, including how to set interest rates in a way that does that in the best way for the American people. And that's not supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be a political decision. So they created this in this law, longstanding, a provision that says that these people can only be fired for cause if they do something wrong. So remember when he was trying to talk, flirting and thinking about firing the chairman, the head of the
Yes.
Federal Reserve,
Yes.
he said he was spending too much money on buildings and tried to use his real estate techniques. In a brilliant moment on camera, the chairman of the Federal Reserve showed him the numbers and the
That's right.
report. You're making this up. That's false. So he was too hard to target. Now they're making up something about this Fed governor, this lower level official still on the Fed. So one question though is, what if they can't prove it? What if they can't show that there's anything wrong that was done here?
They can't. They can't.
And
They're
I
not
don't
even
think they
looking to.
can. So,
They're
so I
going
wish
on
I could say,
innuendo.
now, if it was a perfect world, I'd say that's the end of it. The Anti-Federalists were wrong. Nothing to worry about. Here's the problem. And this is what comes back for those listeners. It'll be a kind of review of themes we're talking about. Those who are new to the show might be hearing it for the first time. But the Supreme Court, really, since 1980, the 1980s, in the Mies Justice Department, and as much as I actually did praise Scalia in the flag burning discussion, here he's a culprit. They
Yes.
developed a theory of executive power called the unitary executive, and it said the president should be able to fire whoever he wants, or she, for any reason. And that theory is increasingly gaining favor with this court. Now they've limited it. They've said in some of what they've said before, they've hinted that they're not going to extend it to the Federal Reserve, but they might. That theory is very powerful, and you only need 5 votes. And so, yes, they might say, and now this would clear the way to firing not just a member of the Fed board, but the Fed chair himself. They might say that under the unitary executive theory, the Federal Reserve is under the power of the president, and he can fire them
Yeah.
for whatever he wants. That's a scary, this is part of why we're at such a scary moment, because if the system worked the way it was supposed to, the way the Federalists thought, that would
That's
be
it.
fine. But the anti-federalists might be right. The Supreme Court might make them right by saying he
You're
can
so right.
fire whoever he wants.
I mean, just think about what this would mean, right? Like investors would lose all confidence in the Fed's ability to make politically tough but necessary decisions. The global markets would have a seizure. Investors would abandon American assets. The bond markets would go haywire. The dollar would plummet. Lots of other stuff a comedian like me doesn't really understand. But if the president could purge central bankers for refusing to juice the economic statistics, because that's what this is about. He wanted to fire Powell because Powell wouldn't cut interest rates to hide the damage the tariffs were doing to the economy. And everyone knows it. All of the financial institutions in the world know what he's doing and they can see it. And this makes U.S. monetary policy no better than chips from a bankrupt Trump casino. Confidence in the Fed is the backbone of the dollar, and Trump is attacking it with a sledgehammer. And as scary as that is, because the Fed is supposed to be independent of political pressure, let me make it scarier, Professor. If presidents can fire Fed governors at will, what precedent does that set for all the other independent agencies? And is there anything the courts and Congress can do in resisting this? I mean, how do the checks even function anymore?
That's right. I mean, we've seen them basically turn the other way when he fired the member of the agency that regulates labor relations. We've seen them in many cases in the Consumer Bureau created by Elizabeth Warren in a famous case, basically refused to protect the independence of that agency. So they're willing to do it sometimes. And in fact, it was announced during that Meese era, and there's a great new book actually by somebody who worked for Meese, detailing exactly how all this was conceived, that during Reagan, they wanted to destroy independent agencies. And the Supreme
Yes.
Court case that protects them, Humphrey's Executor, which we've talked about, they want the court to just overturn. Now, the Fed has been seen as like super independent for a long time. It's not just independent for all the reasons that you outlined, John. It's been seen as almost untouchable. But this president doesn't see it that way. And I'm not sure that the Supreme Court sees it that way. They might go along with such a firing, even if there was no cause. They might, under the theory of the unitary executive, say what the anti-federalists were worried about. The president can do whatever he wants when it comes to hiring and firing because these people, including the Fed, work for him. Now, if it was a normal president or a less narrow-minded one, maybe they would still find people that were doing the public good. But I worry with this president when it comes to his motivation. When I hear him talk about this, he's very focused on mortgage rates, and he's clearly thinking about the real estate business. And he wants cheap money from the government. He couldn't care less about these big economic questions of macroeconomics. He cares about whether or not he can get cheap loans or refinance the loans that he has.
Exactly.
And that's what, to say the least, bad for America.
By the way, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook plans to sue over Donald Trump's unprecedented and illegal attempt to fire her from the U.S. bank. This is going to set up a legal battle over who is really in charge of the world's most important central bank, and I can guarantee you Fox News viewers will know nothing about it. Okay, we got to take a break. When we come back, Corey, let's talk about redistricting and gerrymandering and what remains of Democratic norms, because Donald Trump is now pressing top Indiana Republicans to redistrict their state during a White House meeting. This is The Oath in the Office. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Oath in the Office. I'm John Fugelsang, along with Professor Corey Brettschneider. Corey, we talked about it last week. Gavin Newsom signed California's brand new congressional redistricting plan. Gerrymandering is not some noble American pastime like baseball or breaking treaties with Indians or writing code. Gerrymandering is like Twinkies. Everybody eats them. Everybody knows they're really bad for you, and every state keeps a whole box in the pantry. The Texas Republicans were under orders from the racist in chief. They gerrymandered their map so hard. I mean, have you seen this? It looks like Picasso drew it during a seizure. And now Gavin Newsom is saying, okay, we're going to come over here and not cheat. We're going to do self-defense. We'll rig it for 5 more seats. So now Trump is trying to get Indiana to do it. Kathy Hochul's in New York. She can't wait to try to do it. It won't be any easier for her than it was for Newsom. But I mean, constitutionally, does this put reformers in a bind? Remember Obama and Eric Holder saying we're going to devote ourselves to getting rid of gerrymandering? the California Democrats are now going to dismantle probably the voter created independent redistricting commission, undoing their own reform to
Yeah.
reduce this. It's like, oh my God, they're so corrupt at this crime. We ban this crime. Now we have to unban this crime to do this crime to fight their crime. What does this do for reform?
John, I mean, I'm going to praise this podcast and thank the listeners who've been so supportive, and then get to the point. But I just have to say, the way that you asked the question, the way we talked about the last issue too, the flag burning, we have the space to reason through it. And I think it's actually a hard problem, and I'll say why. I mean, I certainly agree that Newsom is doing the right thing in the end, but I have
Yeah.
to just say that the context of it is so important here because there was a period of time where California had horrible gerrymandering, and it was a particular vicious kind of gerrymandering because it was meant simply to gerrymander in a way that would keep incumbents in power. And it was a way of, I keep harping on the theme of the anti-federalists. I'm obsessed with them at this moment because one thing they were worried about is you'd have these elite representatives that would never be accountable to the people. What's a way to ensure that? It's to have system in which incumbents are never going to lose, and that's what they had. And Arnold
Yes.
Schwarzenegger, you could criticize him for all sorts of things. I happen to like the Terminator. Some of the other Total Recall, I'm not a huge fan, but what I am a fan of is his combating gerrymandering. That he really worked
Yes.
across the aisle to create a system that was independent for drawing districts. And California succeeded in defeating the long tradition, unfortunately, of drawing districts in a way to support incumbents. Now, what this proposal would do is upend that. It would really replace it with, and
Yes.
let's call it what it is, a gerrymander. But, and this is what Newsom is saying, and I think this is where we both are winding up. This is a break the glass moment. I mean, when I say that we're headed towards a hard coup, that isn't a joke. When the military are in
No, it's
DC,
true.
they're being pushed back occasionally. We'll see how they succeed. But he has enormous power. That's my main theme, my whole purpose in wanting to do this podcast with you. The president takes an oath that's about constraint, but he can do all sorts of horrific things. And if we don't have a Congress to check him, that's a problem. Now, you can't just cheat because of that. You can't, let me rephrase that actually. You couldn't cheat to just because of that. That would be cheating if California was just like, we want to get rid of them. I think fairness still matters, not just saving democracy. But
Yes.
when Texas is involved in ensuring that there's not going to be a nationally fair competition, we have to think of this in terms of self-defense. It's wrong to hit somebody, but if you need to hit somebody to defend your life, yes, you're entitled to do it as a matter of law. And that's what this is. It's a self-defense of the democratic system when we think of it as a
Yes.
whole. It would be wrong in the context of California only, but we're talking about a national congressional election. Now, this is not only not ideal, it's a horrible moment for democracy. We need legislation to ensure that we never would get to this point. But until then, I think this is the only self-defense. It's like hitting somebody to protect your life.
No, you're right. And, people who are terrified of the collapse of democracy really aren't going to notice the collapse of the bipartisan anti-gerrymandering movement of the last decade, I guess. I mean, and what Texas, have you seen these things? They're like Rorschach blots. There's one district that looks exactly like Ted Cruz's neckbeard. And again, I understand reformers are in a bind between defending principle and responding to political realities. Is there any constitutional standard, Professor, after Rousseau v. Common Cause, that
Well,
could
look,
restrain states from doing even more aggressive gerrymandering? Or is it just going to be blue state does it, red state does it? And I mean, look in California right now, like they've had to combine right-wing rural districts with like Marin County. I mean, it's like making Kid Rock and Michael Moore do a long car ride together. You know what I'm saying? Like people are already having their vote taken away, just as black folks in Texas are losing their representation. Conservative folks in California are going to lose theirs, and I don't think the Republicans care.
well, there's a lot in there. I mean, the main thing I think that we have to always talk about is what the system would look like if we could repair it. But one of the things that is deeply broken is, I've taught a lot in law schools and in political scientists and political science departments. And one of the great things about being a professor in these two places is that you see a lot of great ideas, a lot of hopeful ideas. And one of them really that does come from academia is the idea that the Supreme Court should strike down partisan gerrymandering, drawing maps in order to benefit one party. And there was a period of time when I think I was more naive at the moment, and it was a different Supreme Court, at one point. It's changed. But where there was a possibility that the court would have said what
Yeah.
they really needed to say to defend democracy and to defend the Constitution, which is if you're drawing a map just to benefit your party, you can't do that. And if we had that in place, that precedent, that principle that was governing how the court enforced the Constitution, then none of this would be happening. But the court's abandoned its role in stopping partisan gerrymandering, and so we're in a street fight. We have Texas doing it. California can be like, look, I'm not gonna try to punch you back if you punch me. Just go ahead, knock me out. But the knocking
Mm.
out is the knocking out of American democracy, and the referee's not there. The Supreme Court is not going to stop a dirty fight, and so that's what we're in. I wish I could put it a different way. That's what it is. It's wrong, but to partisan gerrymander. But what's the alternative? And that's why another constitutional law professor, Barack Obama, has weighed in on this, and I think with the same heavy heart that we've got to go with Newsom's plan.
Well, speaking of dirty fights, the Supreme Court won't be stopping. And thank you for that segue. When we come back, this government has found an all new way to persecute Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The courts have forced them to follow the law. We have witnessed an American Attorney General Pam Bondi forced to comply with the law, and they're trying a brand new way to set the law on fire. Also, how much do you guys want a dictator? Donald Trump tells me you want one quite a bit. We'll be right back on The Oath in the Office. Welcome back to the Oath in the Office podcast. I'm John Fugelsang, joined by the great Professor Corey Brettschneider. Corey, I think by now a lot of folks have heard the clip, but let's just give it a listen. Trump said recently that a lot of people might like a dictator. Here is the quote. Clip here. Now, he's actually said this more than once this week already. He's got two new catchphrases. One of them is that I stopped 6 wars, which became 7, which is now 10 wars he stopped. 9 of those were games of Battleship that Stephen Miller let him win, by the way. But his other catchphrase is this really weird thing that a lot of people are saying they might like a dictator. Corey, I get it. This guy spends 100% of his time around yes men, sycophants, quislings, and people who would love a dictator. His followers around him worship him for their own selfish, grubby ends, and they're all stupid, and they tell him all day they'd love him to be a dictator. But how dangerous is it, constitutionally and politically, for a sitting president, even one who is already consigned to history books as being a racist clown? How scary to openly flirt with authoritarianism like this? This is a focus group, what he's doing here. He's market research testing how people will respond to this sentence.
That's right. In fact, his phrase, a lot of people are saying, I have an amazing colleague, Nancy Rosenblum, we should have her on the show. She has a whole book using that phrase that's about Trump's kind of reasoning, where he doesn't engage in reasoning. He sort of hides his ideas. He tests them out, as you just said. And so when you hear that phrase, a lot of people are saying it's signaling something that he deeply wants. And that's not a surprise. He said really from day one he admires dictators. He couldn't care less about the idea of a rule of law in the Constitution. And I can't come back to our title of our podcast enough. Article 2 says the president has to say specific words to preserve,
That's right.
protect, and defend the Constitution. The office and the law is above the president. And this guy doesn't believe that for a second. He blows through it every time. He has his own desires, things he wants to do. And when you frame it all in terms of dictatorship, it looks completely normal.
That's right.
Banning burning the American flag, arresting dissenters, denying non-citizens due process rights, firing whoever he wants, despite the fact that the law prevents that. All of that amounts to a kind of authoritarianism that we often call dictatorship.
Uh-huh.
And,
Yep.
as historians look back on this moment, there are moments in democracies that existed, stopped, and then returned, where the historians talk about the period of the dictatorship. They say that about the Pinochet era in Chile and Argentina. And now when we refer to this as the dictatorship, we can't be sure. He is a buffoon, but so were some of the worst dictators, fascist dictators in particular, throughout American history. Think of Mussolini. He was a buffoon. If you listen to his speeches, it's,
Yeah.
he looks ridiculous.
Yes.
This guy's
I know,
also
but we
ridiculous.
but hey, listen, we didn't defund public education for 50 years in this country to elect smart people, Corey. And
Ah,
yes, he's a buffoon, but again, look, this is what the media is
so
not
it's
allowed to
silly
say.
and scary. That's my bottom line.
We got a lot of dumb people in this country, and the one thing I'll say, look, if you're not a millionaire and you vote for Trump, I'm going to call you dumb. And if you're a millionaire and you vote for Trump, I'm going to call you selfish and evil and dumb. But in your book, we know this. We talk about it. You just said it. The president swears not loyalty to ideology, not loyal to party, but to Constitution.
Right.
What do right-wing people need to understand about how rhetoric like some people would like a dictator betrays that oath?
Well, at least it's transparent because what's going on here is sometimes secretly couched in some fake appeal to the Constitution. So I'll go back to our first discussion. That executive order is written in a way that respects the rule of law. If you read its words, and it talks about respecting the free speech, respecting Texas versus Johnson, even the case that they clearly want to overturn with this. And yet
Mm-hmm.
we know what his motive is to shut down dissent. So what I think is good about this moment and moments like it is that we see what's on the table, which is that you have two systems. You have a constitutional system devoted to democracy and the rule of law, defined by we the people, and another based in an authoritarianism from an unhinged character. And when he says, a lot of people are saying, we want a dictator, he's letting us know that, yeah, that's what he wants.
I know,
So
and a lot of people want it
at
too.
least the benefit is that we see the real stakes on the table.
Yeah, I would submit to you that the one quality that every Trump voter shares in common is a penchant for authoritarianism. That's the one unifying characteristic I find across the entire breadth of profoundly Caucasian MAGA. We got to talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Professor, yet again. Boy, have I learned a lot about this country from this man's struggles. Now, he was had protected status. He was following the rules. He had fled persecution. He was here. He was going to immigration court. He was keeping up with his paperwork. The government kidnapped him. The government lied about him. They lied about his tattoos. The whole world said, holy crap, you think we're that stupid? You can't, it doesn't say MS-13 on his damn hands, Trump. They laughed at his wife's suffering. They laughed at his children's weeping. They laughed and said he will never set foot in this country again. The DOJ lawyer who admitted to the judge that it was a mistake to fire him was fired by Pam Bondi because the war on truth in this administration is the truest thing about them. The Supreme Court said 9-0. You got to bring them home. They still waited months and dragged their feet. And then, as you know, Corey, they waited months, finally brought him back, stomped their feet, and they said, but he's got to still face trial, you stinking liberals. And all the stinking liberals were like, cool, that's what the Constitution says. Put him on trial. We don't due process. We want to follow the Constitution, you depraved power junkies. We don't care about this guy. Trial is due process. We're good with it. And the White House went, wait, that's not a win for us? And the appearance of winning matters far more to weak, amoral people than matters of justice. So last week, Kilmar Abrego Garcia embraced his 3 children for the first time in 100 days. He's already on electronic monitoring from the U.S. Marshal Service. He's basically on house arrest, but they arrested him again anyway. And screw putting him on trial now, Corey. Forget the trial they were talking about. They want to send him to another continent. They rearrested him days after a Tennessee judge rejected the government's push to keep him locked up. And they're saying, you know what? Forget El Salvador. This time, let's deport him to Uganda, a country he did not flee and has no connection to. Corey, this is not even deportation. This is spinning the globe with your eyes closed and pointing. What is the next step here? And how shocked are you that this administration can't just take the win, pretend they're the good guys? Their vanity is making them go overtime to be villains in every history book.
Well, all of these cases are, individually horrifying, but they also bring out a common theme, which is this sort of move from democracy to authoritarianism, the process of the moving from increasingly soft coup to a more obvious hard coup. And one of the main themes that we've been tracing, unfortunately, from the beginning in this podcast, and I urge listeners to go back and listen to our interviews with Mike Zamore, because in that first interview, Mike Zamore, the policy director of the National ACLU, and I had an opportunity too to speak to the ACLU recently. I gave a talk to their senior leadership team. I'm doing a follow-up too for them. And this organization, I have to praise them because they found this litigant. They saw what was going on, and these cases don't just get in the media from nowhere. It has to be the case that lawyers swoop in, that they see why it's not just an injustice, but one that threatens all sorts of constitutional rights. And this is the biggest one because they are essentially denying that if you are that in this case that there is any right to due process. They clearly don't think that non-citizens have a right to due process,
That's
even
right.
though it's guaranteed under the Constitution to persons, not to citizens. And both the Fifth and 14th Amendment make that clear. So now here's what's going on. They started to win. And courts were saying, hey, return this guy. And in fact, he was freed. So what is an authoritarian regime going to do when the courts say, hey, there's a rule of law still, and they don't go along, as they have in some cases, with their authoritarian ambitions? You just ignore the courts. And one of the things that you can do, and this is true of plea bargaining, there are all sorts of ways that the Department of Justice, the Homeland Security, the Trump administration can put pressure on somebody like Mr. Abrego Garcia. And the way is to threaten him that, look, if you don't make a deal with us to go, for instance, he's expressed some openness to Costa Rica. That might, I think, wind up happening. We're going to send you to a place you really don't want to go, a gulag, for instance, in Uganda.
Uh-huh.
Okay, we can't send you to El Salvador. We don't want to defy the courts there, but let's find another place. And that is authoritarianism. It's a textbook study in how to destroy the rule of law by using all of the administrative tools. Yet another
Yep.
worry of the anti-federalists. It's happening. This move that we talked about last time from soft coup to hard coup. I wish I could say I was exaggerating. No, it's real. I saw, by the way, Bill Maher. I don't know if he's listening to the podcast, but he started to use similar language, and at least people are starting to see this for what it is. I did the
Yeah.
same on CNN. I think the interviewer on CNN, if you listen to I put it on our YouTube channel. But I was being asked all these sort of boring questions, and I basically said, "No, this is a hard coup. Get
Wow.
real."
Hey,
And
can I put
that's the
my
way we have to talk about it.
can I put my CNN appearances on our
Yes,
on our
of
YouTube channel,
course,
Corey? Oh, I had no idea.
absolutely.
Well, now I'm excited about this job. All
Yeah.
right, great. Professor, I mean, let's take all this together we've been talking about today. This unconstitutional executive order, the attack on Fed independence, redistricting wars, the authoritarian rhetoric, the abuse of the least of us. I mean, do you see any broader strategy at play, or is this just good old authoritarian chaos?
Well, I think that it's chaotic when you look at it. And you look at the deployment in Washington, D.C., you look at any of these matters, that weird press conference where they're all giving different explanations of what this executive order is,
Oh,
one sensible, one totally insane, the president's being the insane version. And, it can look like chaos, but it's chaos organized to one goal, and that's the consolidation of power. And, he is a buffoon, but he's also in the midst of a system. If he was just a member of Congress, it'd be fine. I debated in Rhode Island, actually, a local member of the Rhode Island legislature. And, this was before the election, and she was taking the pro-Trump side. I was taking the anti-Trump, of course. And she said, we hear about this, authoritarianism. People accuse all sorts of people about that. And my response to her, which I think shut her down, frankly, and the audience, I think, grasped it. And I want America to grasp this, is if we were talking about a senator, a congressperson, a judge, even a Supreme Court justice who had authoritarian ambitions, it doesn't matter. We're talking about the President of the United States, the office that the Anti-Federalists rightly predicted could collapse the entire system. The office that in other countries, I mentioned Chile, that the chief executive can use, a president can turn themselves into a dictatorship with ease because the power is consolidated there. That's the theme. That's why this otherwise buffoon, somebody we could laugh at, is so dangerous. That
yep.
defines everything, not only from today's discussion, but from all of them. That's the framework. That's why I wanted to start this podcast and why I'm so grateful for you to give me a way to make it
Oh, Corey,
clear to people.
I keep telling you, you don't have to thank me. It was terms of my parole. Okay, so here's the deal then. I mean, for our listeners who are terrified about the Constitution's survival in this moment, we talk a lot about what the courts and the Democrats and everybody else has to do. What role can ordinary people play in defending our Constitution right now, Corey?
Well, I think the first thing is, to educate yourself. That's what we're trying to do. You can find other sources that there is a rule of law. There is a system in the way it's supposed to function. And we've got to hold up that ideal against the travesty that we're seeing every day and not give up, not say it's just politics. We have to talk about how it's supposed to be and how it is. And that contrast, I think, gives us strength. Telling the truth is a huge part of this and not looking away. And that's what we're trying to do here every week. You have other communities that are doing it. I'm hearing from listeners that they're using the podcast as a jumping off point to talk to other people. Of course, protests of groups like the ACLU and Indivisible who are going out into the streets and saying the simple thing, no kings. If we had a point here, it's that slogan used so well by those groups. And then, I want to give a shout out to those who are just taking photos and camera recordings of
Yes.
ICE, of the police on the street in Washington, D.C. Show them that they're being watched. Show them what that shows them isn't just that we're going to see them, that shows them that we're holding them up to this abstract standard that I'm talking about. The rule of law only exists if people defend it. And that's what my book shows, that the danger of authoritarian collapse is always there in the United States and abroad, especially in a system like ours that doesn't have a parliament but has a president. And the only thing that allows it to survive is the people being vigilant in holding a president to account.
That's it.
So don't give up. As dangerous as it is, I will not stop with that theory of hope. By the way, people often say to me, how can you be so hopeful? It's so horrible what's happening. And my answer, and I'll give it now, is we have no choice. There is no alternative but hope.
Amen. Professor Brettschneider, thank you so much for this podcast. What is the best way for our listeners to follow you, sir, and to keep up with your brilliance the other 6 days of the week?
I mean, of course, subscribe. Thank you for these reviews that keep coming out in. We're now above 350. We have gotten as high as 7 on the Apple charts, and I think last week we were at 9. Help break us into the top 5 by writing a review or a word. It doesn't have to be a review. Put stars on there, and most importantly, tell people about it. Share it. Click that share function. And if you want to watch us, not just listen to us, you can find us on YouTube. The Oath in the Office channel is up, including that CNN interview and John's CNN interviews, which are brilliant. I'm going to put those up too. I think I've seen almost all of them, but there are many, so I'll look for those. And then you can find me on Blue Sky at Democracy Prof, and on Twitter, still hanging in there. I mean, I'm not happy to be on Elon Musk's hate platform, but I'm doing my best at Brettschneider C if you want to follow me there.
Right on. And you guys can follow me on all the socials. My show is on SiriusXM every night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. The John Fugelsang podcast is free and comes out daily. I have a Substack. You can call it the Fugel Stack if you want. I don't call it that. And my book is called Separation of Church and Hate, A Sane Person's Guide to Taking Back the Bible from Fundamentalist, Fascist, and Flock-Fleecing Frauds. It's a guide for believers of all faiths and atheists and agnostics and even nice conservatives on how to thump Bible thumpers with the Bible, because we're all going to have to deal with these Christian nationalists trying to force their narrow, hateful version of a religion based on peace onto the rest of us. Corey, thank you so much. I want to thank Wendy and Beowulf and everyone who puts together the show every week. We'll be back again next week. And thank you guys. Please, we've got to tell them to subscribe, right? And give us a good review.
And John, let me just add a final thought about your book. I'm so excited that it's coming out. I'm excited that we're going to have an episode where I get to interview you about it. And I will say, too, that it is so consistent with the spirit of this podcast, because it not only talks about the importance of fighting authoritarianism generally, but your book specifically is about resisting Christian nationalism. And I think there couldn't be a more important topic. So congrats on it. The country is about to see how brilliant it is, and I can't wait to have our episode about it.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm John Fugelsang on behalf of Professor Brettschneider. Thank you all for joining us. Please do subscribe and all the good stuff, and we'll see you next time on The Oath and the Office.